Hello, I'm Namo Abdullah and welcome to Inside America. The near 3-year-old civil war in Syria has killed more than 100,000 people. It has also caused a refugee crisis resulting in the displacement of millions of people. For many, the conflict appears like a religious war between the Sunnis and the Alawites, who are an offshoot of Shia Islam. Almost all Sunni countries support Sunni-dominated rebels, while Shia-led nations and groups such as Iran, Iraq and Hezbollah support and aid the Alawite regime of President Bashar al-Assad. External support has only intensified the conflict, resulting in more bloodshed and deaths of more civilians. Every side of the conflict argues that Allah or God is on their side. The intensification of conflicts in the Middle East has prompted many to ask a more fundamental question: is Islam a religion of peace? Critics of Islam may say there is no point in asking such a question. Just look at the killings and suicide attacks Muslims carry out across the world on a daily basis. The answer is clear. Supporters of Islam may say it's utterly offensive to blame an entire faith for the actions of a small group of Muslims. Can we blame Christianity as a religion for the conflicts of the medieval age, or more recently the genocide in Rwanda? Well, to debate whether Islam is a religion of peace, I am joined by Dr. Saeed Said, Director of Interfaith and Community Alliances at the Islamic Society of North America, and Dr. David Wurmser, a Middle East expert who served as an advisor to former Vice President Dick Cheney. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Said, you can now go ahead and answer the question whether Islam is a religion of peace.
Thank you. Thank you for this kind of discussion. We need to have more and more of it. You know that, as you said yourself, that Christianity, we don't ever think that it is a religion of violence, even though World War I, World War II, whole 250 years of crusades, they were fought by Christians and against Muslims. But then we go to the principles, to the actual teachings of a religion, and see how it inspires the individuals, what kind of relationship it prescribes between individual and God and between individual and fellow human beings. So that's exactly what our Prophet has done whole life. He established a society which was beyond tribal and other conflicts. Medina was a wonderful model where he brought some different tribes, some of them who migrated from Mecca, and he created a new constitution which spelled out religious freedom and the human dignity of people of all faiths, all tribes, all colors. So that was the model, and that is repeatedly reinforced when you look at different stages in his life and you look at the Quran, which is the scripture, the holy book for us. So I'm not going to go into details, but I will just give you one example. The Prophet, towards the end of his life, he was sitting and there were many people around him, and he was explaining to them something. And there was a young companion of the Prophet, Adi bin Hatim. He was listening to him. So Prophet was telling the people, his companions, he said, ultimately a time is going to come. There will be peace all around the peninsula and all around the world. So Adi bin Hatim, he was wondering how Prophet is saying that. So the Prophet said that a time is going to come. We have trained our people. We have uplifted their sense of responsibility and their sense of right and wrong. So a time is going to come when an old woman will travel all the way from Hira, which is in Iraq, to Mecca and Medina, and there will be no one to harm her on this long trip. So Adi says, I was wondering how could that happen, because he said that I remembered very clearly that from Hira to Mecca there were highwaymen, robbers and thieves, and there was no one who could at that time have ever traveled that long distance. But then Adi remembered this saying of the Prophet, and he lived to see it, and he then affirmed that this was the message of the Prophet, that ultimately praying 5 times a day, giving alms to the poor, fasting the month of Ramadan, making a Hajj, this will ultimately result, according to the vision of the Prophet, in building a peaceful environment where a lonely woman will feel respected and will feel safe, and there will be people who will do that.
So are you saying that the Prophet and Islam are in themselves peaceful, but it's the Muslims who are violent? It's not the Islam?
It is
for the conflicts that we see in the Middle East.
Each conflict has its own history. Some conflicts go for hundreds of years. People have been subjected through colonial occupation. People have some old grudges, tribal conflicts. There are certain injustices done in certain regions. So all these things have accumulated. So therefore today Muslims are trying to find ways of overcoming those conflicts. So you have here in America, we are today, you know that slavery was part of American society. Obama would not have been in the White House if 150 years ago in our country, here in USA.
I think it's time to bring Dr. Windsor into the discussion. He basically says Christianity and Islam are just the same in the sense that we've both had violence. What's your response to that?
Well, there is some truth in that. I wouldn't deny it. I mean, Christianity certainly has had its periods where it's following of ostensibly of what Jesus wanted was thin indeed, and there were some very violent periods in Christianity. There's no doubt about that. I think though that where we started to go, which is I think a very smart way to start looking at it, is there's 3 ways to really ask the question: is Islam a religion of peace? Are Muslims a community of peace? And is the practice and theory in line? And you get 3 different sort of discussions of each of those, but they're all important to answer this question. Islam is a religion of peace. Other than the very straightforward question, which is reacting to the popular view that Islam comes from the same word as salam and shalom and so forth, and therefore is peace, is wrong. It doesn't really come from that. It's a different concept. Islam doesn't put peace as the central idea of what it is. Neither does really Christianity or Judaism, so to be fair. In a sense, there is a similar view in Christianity. Christianity does, you hear pace and so forth, the Pope says it a lot, but it really is ultimately a consequence of the triumph of Christian view, of Christianity, the Christian soul. And similarly in Islam, the view that peace ultimately is a result of the triumph and adherence to Islam. So other than the superficial one, which is the one that governs Washington, that, oh, it's a religion of peace because peace is in its name, I think that's the most difficult question to ask. The first one is the Muslim community. There has been an Arabization of Islam. Obviously, the Arabs were the first Muslims. But over the last 100 years, you've seen a reassertion of the Arab world over the role of Islam. And communities such as Turkey and so forth have fundamentally changed as a result. The second thing that I think is very important is the tremendous upheaval the core of the Islamic world has had politically and the violence done to elites over the last 100 years among themselves has led to, I think, a fairly significant brutality that governs the politics of the core of the Muslim world. And that's influenced the character of Islam that's emerged from it. You can't look at a situation like Iraq or under Saddam Hussein or over the last 100 years. You can't look at the violence of politics in the within the Palestinian community in the 20s and 30s with Hajj Amin al-Husseini without understanding its impact on the ideas and the structure of Islam within that community. So to put it, to bring it sort of to a blunt point, I would say that it's very difficult to say whether Islam is a religion of war as opposed to a religion of peace. but the Muslim community has drifted into a fairly violent state, and it's a problem that the world is dealing with.
So are you blaming Islam for that, or are you, you said the Muslims have impacted Islam,
well,
or is it the other way around? It's actually the violence comes from within Islam.
Well, one great scholar of Islam once asked, does Islam deserve the Arabs, or Arabs deserve Islam? And it's a very difficult chicken and egg problem. The tribalism and so forth is, in many ways, the essence of the early Arab politics that was also embedded in Islam, and the recognition of some legitimacy to that. Now, that said, I do think that there are some problems within Islam that lead to the inability to strongly reject and put a brake on some of the violence. Namely, the polemic of unity, which is inherent to the differentiation with the Christian world or the Jewish world. Both are seen as flawed because they created artificial divisions in the perfection of the revelation and perfection of mankind, or perfection of God's creations, doesn't leave room for the tolerance of division. Ultimately embedded in Islam is the idea that ultimately other forms of belief will have to go away. So I don't believe they've had yet the shock and trauma of an extremely violent period in Christianity, which was the period of 500 years ago that led to the 30 Years' War and the Treaty of Westphalia, which led to the death of about a third of all of Christians in Europe, which is something the Arab world can't even imagine at this point, to have 1/3 killed in war. But unfortunately, the Muslim world has not gone through that. So there's still this rigidity that is dangerous and doesn't put the brakes on violence.
Do you have...
When we are discussing this, it's with utmost sympathy and utmost, future of the whole mankind. It's not you and me. It's not Christianity versus Islam. It's a joint understanding what could be done and how it could be done. The problem is that over the last several centuries, there has been so much of intrusion into the Muslim world. Things have not evolved by themselves. So we have an opportunity today to see that the core values and the core teachings of the Quran and the life of the Prophet and the long intellectual history is geared in a way that it fulfills the ultimate vision of Islam, the ultimate vision of Prophet. So that's not an easy task. You gave a wonderful, overview how much sacrifice it took within Christianity. We cannot leave Muslims on their own, just Kurdish Muslims, and they will come up with an ideal understanding of Islam. It has to be done throughout the Muslim world and throughout Europe and the West.
I'd like to understand, how can I understand the conflict in Syria? There are the rebels, the Sunni rebels say we are doing this because it's jihad.
Right.
And the Iranian government sends troops to support Assad. Hezbollah goes to fight. They're also saying it's jihad.
Right.
So, like, who's right in interpreting Islam?
Yeah,
is there anybody who can tell us what Islam is?
That's a very good example you gave. Here in this country, slavery was a major problem here. We had already a constitution which said, we the people. It should have included the blacks as well. But you know, it took years and years. This year we were celebrating 150th year of the abolition of slavery. So slavery was not just abolished with one stroke. There was a war. 600,000 Christians fought on both sides. They were quoting Bible on both sides. They were asserting their religious identity on both sides. But ultimately it happened that they were able to abolish slavery. Then it took another 100 years to abolish the segregation here in the South. You and me here in America would not have been treated the same way, would not have been allowed to enter the same restaurants in the South. But the reformist movement within Christianity ultimately asserted and were able to deliver.
So do you think there should be a reformist movement within Islam as well?
You have a wonderful example here in me. I represent the 7 million Muslims in America. We are celebrating this year 50th anniversary of our growth and development, because our organization, Islamic Society of North America, was established 50 years ago. We have raised our children, our grandchildren in this country. They are part of the American pluralist democracy. They are empowered. Our children are in leadership positions. They keep their Islam. They practice their Islam. During the month of Ramadan, they fast.
Shias and Sunnis together?
Both. They go for Hajj. We have our convention every year where we have about 50,000-60,000 people attend that convention, in which you have Shias and Sunnis together. You have to see our joint communique only a few months back, where we brought Shia scholars and Sunni scholars, and together we had a wonderful communique. It's called Washington Declaration of Shia-Sunni Understanding. So these things have to be done. We cannot just leave it to those people like Saddam Hussein and other these tyrants and the oppressors of the Muslim world, that they will help us to resolve these things. It will need extraordinary resources of Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, of all humanity together to help this big segment of Muslim community in the world, about 2 billion Muslims, to come and to go through that transformation.
David, is there a room for reform in Islam?
There is, but I think you cut right to the central question of interpretation. I mean, you see some passages in the Bible, in the Christian and Jewish core, the Old Testament, where you see laws like an eye for an eye and so forth. But the interpretation has, over thousands of years, has led to a civil code. Nobody pokes another person's eye out in America because somebody accidentally destroyed somebody's eye. It is interpreted as equivalent punishment, or commensurate punishment to the issue. So interpretation becomes key to reform, and yet there is at the core right now, especially, and unfortunately to some extent the money and influence of Saudi Arabia and others has some role here, is to impose a rigidity and a rejection of interpretation as innovation and a terrible thing, which emanates from some of the Wahhabi ideas and so forth. That unfortunately is not a dominant view, but it is a rising view, and it accounts for some of the violence in it. But again, I do return that there is though in Islam something that is much older in Christianity, but has been superseded to some extent by the Renaissance, and that is the understanding that there is no the whole concept of Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb, and the whole idea of beyond the need to convert and so forth. In Christianity, it took again a third of the continent to be killed to understand that that is a dangerous path to pursue. But we haven't yet had that in a traumatic consequence. And so I think it's still a dangerous situation intellectually. But so it says, yes, there should be reform, absolutely.
The late Christopher Hitchens mentions those two concepts that you mentioned, Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam. But he also says that the problem with Islam, as it is with some other religions as well, is that it's absolutist, it's totalitarian. It says Islam is the last and final religion. Do you see a problem with that?
Yeah, there is a problem with that. I mean, there's no doubt. If it's the last and final religion, the others, by ipso facto, have to go away. It is also, one has to understand the origins of Islam too, which is the rise of, at the very beginning, Muhammad was he wasn't a person with a great deal of power. And there's a body of Islamic thought surrounding that period. Then there was a second period where essentially Islam succeeded and began a great expansion. And that then required the organization of a community which is very military on some level. You pick and choose, and how you interpret the balance and so forth is room for reform, but also room for violence.
Let me bring Dr. Said in. Dr. Said, I want to ask you the same question that Christopher Hitchens asked. He says, he doesn't ask, he actually criticized Islam
right.
for claiming that it's the last and final religion, it's the only true religion.
Right. Chronologically, that's true. Islam came after Christianity, after
Is
Judaism.
it just a chronological matter, or is just also a matter of...
No, it is the content is very critical. Islam recognizes Christianity, respects Jesus, recognizes the immaculate birth of Jesus, respects Moses, recognizes the fact that he went on Mount Sinai, and he had the revelation from God. So it's a matter of recognition and respect. It's not a matter of conflict. And that's where you have wonderful examples when Islam ruled. Christianity, however small the numbers might have been, they were respected and preserved. It became the responsibility of Muslim rulers and Muslim neighbors to protect those. It's not what we hear today in Nigeria. They are burning the temple, they are burning the churches, or in Pakistan. This is un-Islamic. Quran is against it. We have been commanded that we should respect and preserve.
But while you're saying Quran is against it,
right.
Osama bin Laden used to say Quran is supportive of that. Why should I believe you and not believe Osama bin Laden?
Yeah, that's why you have such a huge number of us here. So much has been evolved and developed. There is within Islam a concept of ijtihad, that is, in a new environment, in new challenges, you reinterpret the principles accordingly. So this age-old, effete and out-of-date polarization of the world into Islamdom and the Darul Islam and Darul Harb, this is out of date. I mean, how 7 million Muslims are living in America, which originated as a Christian majority countries. So the fact that we are living together with full respect, what spells out our relationship, it defines our relationship with American Constitution. And American Constitution is so close to the Constitution that the Prophet had in Medina. That's why we feel proud of it. And we don't have this Darul Harb and Darul Islam, because that would destroy the very foundations of our empowerment in America. So we have raised our communities, we have built our mosque, we have tremendous experiences together with the Jews and the Christians. You remember 2 years ago, we went through a very difficult situation here. That is when this pastor in Florida wanted to burn the Quran. You remember? That was the same time when the Ground Zero Mosque was a major issue. That was the same time when Murfreesboro, Tennessee, they were not allowing a mosque. So we were wondering what's happening. So at that time, our partners, National Council of Churches, Union of Reformed Judaism, so these organizations came forward. They said, we will not allow this kind of Islamophobia.
In this section, there is 1 minute left. I would like to have Dr. Wormser answer one question.
But I wanted to complete this
we
one
will
sentence.
be back for the second,
Okay.
for the second discussion. Right. Do you have any problems with Quran itself, with the text, with Islam?
Well, there are, yes. I mean, the idea that, one says it's tolerant, but at the same time we have khaybar and we have embedded in the behaviors at the very beginning an intolerance as well for the failure to convert or the failure to politically support. So again, it doesn't, the brakes aren't there against that. And the second thing too is that well, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, after a short break, we will come back to continue our discussion. Dear viewers, please stay with us. We will come back to dig deeper on the question of whether Islam is a religion of peace. Hello again and welcome back to Inside America. We're discussing whether Islam is a religion of peace or not. And I'd like to come back to Dr. Saeed and ask you a question. There are Muslims, when you ask them, they say Quran is the perfect book. There is no mistake in the Quran. And they also say Prophet Muhammad was a perfect person.
Right.
So that means that no criticism of them is accepted. Is that right?
Right. No, I mean, criticism of Prophet lived an age of 63 years. He was prophet for 23 years. He built a community for 23 years. There were people who opposed him. There were people who threw him out of his homeland. So it's possible we could disagree on certain things. We continuously discuss some of his sayings and see how they would fit in his own message. There are certain things, if you find them contradictory, then you interpret them in a different way. But the thrust of the thing is, as I was telling you earlier, when he gave the final khutbah, that's called the farewell address before he passed away. And there you have to read that gives you the actual vision of the Prophet. Then you have to fit those things in those. So the Prophet, on the one hand, for example, was very careful that we should have happy, prosperous families where men and women, husband and wife, they contribute towards mutual tranquility and peace. So therefore, at that time, it was a tribal environment. Women had a very low esteem, but he was bringing them into these discussions and conversations. When there was election, women were also giving bay'ah.
You are basically not seeing a problem with the claim that Islam makes to be the perfect religion, and with the Prophet Muhammad being a perfect man.
Right.
There is no problem with that.
But at the same time, Islam allows other expressions. For example, first thing is Islam allows that there will be Christians. We should deal with them with respect as we do in America. Islam allows to recognize Jews as genuine, legitimate, with long history of their own spirituality, respects their books and so on. And Islam encourages to be with these people, shoulder to shoulder, work for the goodness of humanity. And intellectual debates, it allows and encourages. So I was telling you about if today, for example, in Saudi Arabia, women cannot drive. Now it's a big thing. Is it from the Quran? Is it from the life of the Prophet? Prophet encouraged to train our daughters as good camel drivers. So I have 3 daughters in America. I raised them here. We don't have camels here. But I took from there a good lesson that the Prophet wants me that they should be as good drivers and as good leaders as our 3 sons are.
That's a great example to shift to Dave. David, do you see a problem with claims that Islam is a perfect religion and Prophet Muhammad was a perfect man?
Yes, I mean, the tolerance of Judaism and Christianity, I think it has to, it's a bigger picture and it's a bigger question than that. There is an interpretation that is more respectful and growing, and this is precisely the task that you have ahead of you, and why it's so important. However, at the core, there was the idea that Judaism received the perfect revelation, essentially the same revelation that Muhammad had received, but the Jews didn't manage to adhere to it and corrupted it. And similar with the Christians, that again, another revelation, but again it was corrupted. So one has to differentiate the view toward Judaism and Christianity, which was seen to be perfect revelations that were corrupted by their communities and then reintroduced to the Muslims who have accepted the perfect revelation and have adhered to it. So there is, in essence, a delegitimization embedded in the idea of Judaism practiced by Jews and Christianity practiced by Christians. And in that result, the result of that is you often see the idea among many elements that are more violent in the Muslim community that even though the Quran does allow for the protection of certain communities, 2 of them, in particular Christianity and Judaism, not other communities, in practice it's still seen as legitimate to kill them because Islam has the right to continue to say whether Jews actually follow Judaism or whether they've become polytheists. And if they become polytheists, they can be killed. So first of all, the intolerance of non-monotheistic religions. But the second thing is the ability of Islam to appropriate the right to define who is a polytheist among Christians and Jews is a big problem.
This is a very serious issue, that there are Muslims who believe that they are not legitimate. But the issue is these are extremists. They do not get their legitimacy from the Quran, the practice of the Prophet. So today they are killing not only Jews and Christians, they are killing their own people. They find some small thing somewhere and then they say that he is not a legitimate Muslim. I mean, that's the problem.
So are you saying that
Yeah.
he basically said, when Islam says we tolerate the Jews and Christians,
Yeah.
we tolerate the definition we have for the Jews and Christians, the kind of Jews that we believe they are real Jews and the Christians. Do you agree with that?
That is what the extremists say. You have to ask me
I'm asking you.
How our scholars
do you leave
it.
them to define themselves who they are?
No, we will not. We define these things. And this is Quran says itself. When Jesus asked, "Who is my follower?" People said, the apostles said, "We are your follower."
But
It is the self-identification. But my issue is, Quran recognizes that Christians believe in the sonship of Jesus, but yet Quran gives them rights. We don't go to them that you have to do this way or that way. We don't tell them that we'll protect your churches and give you the full rights in a Muslim society, even though you are Christian. It has never been. Rather, this is true about Christians and Jews. Jews did not recognize Christians, and Christians always thought that the Jews were the Christ killers. So there was always this mutual tension. It's only just 50 years ago, we are celebrating this year, 50th anniversary of the Second Vatican. For the first time, Catholics recognized that Jews did not crucify Jesus. But for us, there was no issue. Jesus was not crucified. We still love them. We still love the Jews. And we were able to build here on this understanding of Islam that Jews and Christians are our nearest to us. And that's what I wanted to tell you, that 2 years ago, 2010, when this pastor wanted to burn the Quran, when the Ground Zero Mosque was seething, when the Murfreesboro Islamic Center was not being allowed to be built, the 50 years of relationships that we have built with Christian and Jewish organizations, the Baptists and the Methodists and Protestants and Catholics, so all of them came. They said that we support you. They have been supporting all the time, and we have been supporting them. But they said that this time we'll have to do something more, because this Islamophobia that is spreading in America, we cannot allow it, because this will destroy the very fabric of America. Attack on one religion is attack on all religion. We will not allow it. So they came and they created a very powerful movement. It's called Shoulder to Shoulder with American Muslims against anti-Muslim bigotry. They raised the funds, about $250,000. They advertised their position. They appointed a director, a wonderful Christian lady who is coordinating it. And on the national level, this powerful movement in America is fighting against Islamophobia. This is because all these people have worked with us in our neighborhoods, in our churches and synagogues and Islamic centers. The thousands of Islamic centers that we have in America have opened their doors to Christians and Jews. This is not happening in Nigeria. This is not happening in Pakistan. So the result is, that's where there is a curtain. We need to remove those curtains. That curtain will be removed if we strengthen this relationship here. If you take out from your mind the unnecessary reservations that you have about Islam and Muslims. If you study Islam by studying me, we write here one book a day in America. American Muslims are highly educated, intellectual. They produce books. Read those books. Go to meet my sons and daughters. Go to meet your neighbors and talk to them. Do they believe in Darul Islam and Darul Kufr? Don't bring these old cobwebs and build this kind of superstructure on this nonsense that we have rejected totally. Tell me how these 7 million Muslims in America, our population is more than many countries, Said. Muslim countries in Gulf countries. So don't expect that my daughters will wear that niqab. Don't ask that my daughters and sons will not like their Christian friends and Jewish these colleagues. It's a new world.
Yeah. No, I mean, I appreciate the effort being made here in America, and it perhaps is the way to go. And But as an American, we have to deal with the realities we're facing in the region.
These are realities. But we have to export that
Let's
goodwill.
No, but our reality is also what happened on 9/11, and reality is also
Right. It
the
came
fact that
from
around
outside.
the entire circumference of the Arab world, there's
Yeah.
violence.
Right.
And and reality is that that freedom and respect for basic freedoms such as freedom of speech
Right.
and so forth. The reality is that if you're in Europe and you write a play that humiliates Moses or humiliates Jesus, you may even get an award from some artistic organization. But if you humiliate Muhammad, you may be killed. This is the reality that we in the West have to deal with. We don't want to have a role to redefine Islam because it's not our religion to redefine. It's not proper for us to redefine. It's not respectful for us to redefine it for you, which is why your effort is so crucial and so important. But the realities that we're dealing with are very dangerous. And yes, there are elements in we do talk about the unity factor. We do talk about the sort of totalitarian nature. There's also, unfortunately, one does look at Muhammad and one does talk about some of the beautiful things that he said, but at the same time, on the lips of many who are going out there and blowing up either Israeli school buses or killing a Jew in a synagogue in France or something, the word Khaybar comes out, which is in the Quran, which is legitimately at the core also of the experience. And it isn't yet the view that you see in America, where we have come to believe that you can't be a Christian in America and say, well, that's more legitimate than Judaism, and make that the religion or the view of the United States.
I need to take another short break, but
Sure.
I'll come back to let you finish your talk on the subject. Dear viewers, please stay with us. We'll be back to dig deeper on the question of whether Islam is a religion of peace. Hello again, and welcome back to Inside America. Dr. Wormser, you were discussing, you're talking about some problems that we face in the Muslim world, and you were kind of drawing a link between what the script in the Quran and the actions of the Muslims. But I remember after 9/11, President George W. Bush, I think at that time you were an advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney, he said Islam is a religion of peace. Do you think he said that out of political correctness or he meant it?
No, I mean, I think there are a lot of advisors and people who comment about these things who don't really understand the religion or the situation. There is a sort of a popular view that Islam is the religion of peace because, again, the word itself seems to come from the same root. Again, it's a false understanding of the root and the language.
Where does it come from, Islam?
More from to submit to the
surrender.
perfection. Well, no, surrender is more of a political term. It's to submit to the revelation, to the will of Allah and so forth. But it isn't the salam, shalom, peace
so you believe
triad.
Islam is not a religion of peace?
No, but I don't believe necessarily Christianity is about peace either, because even though peace plays a role, it is not the thing that Christianity is about. Nor in Islam, it's a subordinate condition to another thing which is more important, which is the revelation and so forth. So I disagree with President Bush on that right off. You can't call it a religion of peace. The real question is it a religion of war? And this now gets to the issue of interpretation, which is the core of what we see attempted here, is to try to interpret, go back to the origins and try to interpret and try to make out of it a religion that functions in America and plays a productive role in America, which many American Muslims have done. The problem is in the region, and to some extent we've talked about Islam rather than Sunni Islam and Shia Islam, there are very serious problems with interpretation in Sunni Islam because of the origins of Sunni Islam in Muawiyah and the way he came to power to define the orthodoxy was essentially appealing to the success as the validation of the legitimacy, which then raises serious questions about the capability to engage interpretation. If everything is then therefore the consequence of an action of Allah, and there's no independent reasoning or independent or secondary causes, so to speak, the triumph of Asharite thought in Islam has been devastating and shaped Sunni Islam. And I think that's what Christopher Hitchens is reacting to, is the rise of Asharism and the works of Al-Ghazali. That has to be reversed, and you're going back 1,000 years to do that. That has to be reversed in order to reintroduce interpretation, but then you still come to the very sticky point of the legitimacy of Muawiyah.
Dr. Said, Dr. Urmza raised a point, a very interesting one, I think. He said, if you humiliate Jesus Christ or Moses in the West, you might be awarded. But if you humiliate Muhammad or Islam, you could be killed in the Muslim world.
Yeah, the reverse is that for the last 1400 years, personality of the Prophet has been a problem for the West. They have always demonized him. Books have been written. I mean, one of the greatest Western scholars during the medieval times, Dante, he wrote his Divine Comedy, and in that he wanted to present the Prophet, and you know how he has shown him. So there has been a persistent effort to demonize and to humiliate. So therefore Muslims have developed that kind of sensitivity. But I don't justify going to the extent where the communication and the dialogue is broken. That's where we are here in America. I mean, you have now a powerful movement within Muslims, Christians, and Jews to recognize the positive contribution of Muslims and naturally
Dr.
indirectly.
Said, let me give bring in a concrete example.
Right.
When the Danish cartoonists they drew cartoons disparaging Prophet Muhammad, Muslims from all over the world spoke against that. Even the clerics, like famous clerics from Al-Azhar, from all over the world, they said this is intolerable. Why is that?
Because I told you, because for centuries there is that sensitivity, they know that they are after. So therefore it was another indication of the colonial masters, supremacists who are doing it. But did we do anything here in America? We are 7 million here. What did we do? We did one thing.
So you believe, do you believe that, that humiliations, criticisms, and even disparaging the Prophet should be allowed?
We won't encourage that.
Do you think it should be allowed?
No, it should not be allowed. There has to be some way. But how do we do that? That is the question. How did we do that? We brought together these leaders, both Christian and Muslim and Jewish. So all of them collectively said that we in America do not endorse this kind of thing. It was not repeated in America. Many things have happened in Europe because Europe has a colonial history. America is a new refined Judaism and a refined Christianity. They know that we don't want to hurt the feelings of
that
others.
example doesn't exist in the rest of the Muslim world. That example of harmony in America. Is that a result of American society, or is that a result of Muslims being peaceful in themselves?
No. There is an institutional development. Institution is there democracy? Is there empowerment? You have seen that Kurdistan has a little more democracy than the rest of Baghdad. And the result is Kurdistan is flourishing. So if you give more democracy, if you provide empowerment, people will develop that kind of mutual respect and tolerance.
Dr. Urmza, he believes that it's all about institutions. The result that we have violence in the Middle East because we don't have robust, strong, democratic institutions.
There is no doubt that that is a major factor in the violence. I think, in fact, the institutions that did exist had embedded in them a violence. The politics of the Middle East, unfortunately, in this way, I fully agree, it's been influenced by European politics for the last 200 years, and specifically continental European politics as opposed to the more liberal tradition of the Renaissance and the British and American revolutions. It's more the French Revolution, which is much more violent. And when the Islamic world, so to speak, became exposed more again to the world and woke up, you started seeing them borrow some of the worst elements of Western political thought, which created a political violence and institutions anchored to those. Baathism is a perfect example. This is not an Islamic movement. This is a European idea translated into a unique Arab Muslim context, but it's not indigenous. That said, I do have to say I don't buy the humiliation argument for two reasons. First of all, the language of discourse in the Middle East generally doesn't use the word humiliation. It uses language that more suggests disdain and a lack of acceptance of the essentially predominant state of the West right now, technologically and so forth. That's the first thing. So I don't, and some of the key elements of humiliation, say the Crusades, you go back to contemporary texts, they were not particularly shocked, or it was more of an introverted view of what was wrong with us, that we lost to these terrible primitive people who were the European Christians at the time. It wasn't the trauma that now we're imposing 1,000 years back. The second thing is, you know, with all due respect to whatever the Muslims might have suffered at the hands of Europeans, the Jews certainly have suffered multitudes more at the hands of the European Christians than have the Muslims. And yet we don't see a structure of legitimization of Jewish violence against Christians embedded out of the 2,000 years, the culmination of which, one must remember, killed 1/3 of the Jewish people in 1940. And you don't see the same violence. So I think there's something in the community that isn't breaking, isn't stopping, and instead is excusing the violence and the as a response to humiliation.
That point that you made about the Holocaust, about how 2/3 of Jews were
1/3, yeah.
1/3 of Jews were killed during the Holocaust, brings me to a point that Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist, made in an interview on Al Jazeera. He said if the Jews were living in the Muslim world, now more than 6 million Jews were still survived, because he said, I don't know why, that's his own point. So do you think that Islam, there is a room there for Islam to be interpreted in a more peaceful way, in a more harmonious way, where Muslims, Jews, and Christians could live together in the Muslim world peacefully?
Two things. One is, with all due respect to Thomas Friedman, the fact is there aren't many Jews left in the Muslim world. Many fled under very horrible circumstances. You saw what Saddam did in the 70s to the Jewish community and so forth. That's number one. Number two, again, I mean, there was no hope for freedom. There's a reason why most Jews before the Holocaust lived in the European countries rather than the Middle East, despite the hostility of the Christians, was that there was still a room for freedom. And as more and more freedom gained momentum in Europe, that's where the Jews gravitated toward.
We have just like a few seconds left.
Right.
Let's give him, we have just 30 seconds left. If you can sum up your point. Dr.
Yeah, I
Said,
think
really
we should really conclude with a very positive note that there is inherent in Islam recognition of the other, respect for the other at every level, whether it is religious, tribal, racial. So Muslims have succeeded in the past to actually implement them. The powerful civilization that was in Al-Andalus with Jews and Christians.
Dr. Said, great note to end the discussion. Really, we don't have any more time left. Thank you so much for talking to Rudao. Dr. David Wurmser, thank you so much for talking to us as well. Dear viewers, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, be well.